and welcome to another episode of our in-depth series. In this particular episode, as we celebrate the Hindi Divas, it might rattle you to know that India has more than 50 crore people speaking Hindi, and it is the third most spoken language in the world. So what is Hindi Divas? Why is it celebrated? And what is the importance of Hindi along with other languages will be discussed here. So as we move on, these are the many topics that we need to know. From Hindi language to Hindi Divas, why do we celebrate it? As there has been a debate around which language should be made the national language, it was of course settled by making Hindi an official language along with English. Constitutional provisions and World Hindi Day as well as International Mother Language Day, because you can be asked a question with respect to that. Moving ahead, let us talk about the Hindi language. If we go back to the history of Hindi language, its beginnings can be traced back to 6th century, and that was basically a religious language in northern India. The literary interaction with Hindi began in 7th century, and after reaching 10th century, it was a well-developed literary, so you can say literary interaction reached at its zenith in the 10th century. In 1826, the first Hindi newspaper was published by the name of Udant Martand, and this was a weekly newspaper. Pandit Jugal Kishore Shukla was the publisher of it, and the date of 30th May is celebrated as Hindi Journalism Day because of this only. So prelims fact I just gave you. Let's move on to the Hindi language. Hindi language is the third most spoken language of the world as of 2019. The first is English, second is Mandarin, then Hindi. Then we have Spanish and French. Then we have Arabic, Bengali, Russian, Portuguese, and Indonesian. It is written in Devanagari script, and more than 50 crore people in India speak this language. In total, 615 million speakers can be found of Hindi. The language got its name from the Persian word Hind, and it means the land of the Indus River as we know it. Basically, it is a descendant of Vedic Sanskrit, and apart from India, we can find the speakers of Hindi in Mauritius, Fiji, Suriname, Guyana, and Nepal, among others. Moving ahead to the other parts, Surya Namaskar, Jungle, Bazaar, and Jugaad are now officially a part of the Oxford Dictionary. The first journal in Hindi language was published on the internet in the year 2000. Moving ahead, now if we speak about Hindi Divas, then Hindi Divas is celebrated every year on September 14, and the day is dedicated to Hindi language, where schools, colleges, academias, offices, government offices as well, they are encouraged to give rise to the usage of Hindi as a lingua franca, bridging linguistic gaps between the diverse nature of the country. And it was announced as the official language of the Union of India on this day only, September 14, 1949. That is why Hindi Day is celebrated on September 14. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru officially declared its celebration. Moving on to Constituent Assembly Debates. So, of course, the Constituent Assembly Debates, when it revolved around which language should be settled as a national language, many people suggested Hindi, others were okay with English. The South culture did not support Hindi becoming the language of the nation. Of course, when there is such a diversity, then diverse opinions are respected. Apart from that, Sanskrit was also touted to become an official language. Other than that, many people talked about Bengali as well. But officially, it was settled that a basic lingua franca should be Hindustani or Hindi basically. So, in favor of Hindi, who all were there? And Gopalaswamy Ayyanagar, he said Hindi in Devanagari script should be the official language, but English should be used for at least 15 years. So that proper lingua franca should be developed. Many of the Constituent Assembly members also suggested that an imposition is not okay, which is fine. But they also said that there should be a proper time given to a country like India to evolve its own lingua franca. Seth Govind Das argued for one language and one script and said that Hindi should replace English at the earliest. R.V. Dhulekar recalled that from Ram Das to Tulsi Das, and from Swami Dayanand to Mahatma, they all wrote in the language Hindi. Now let's talk about who all were as per not against the language, but yes, they were against using one language as a hindrance for other cultures to develop. Let's talk about Nazaruddin Ahmad. He said English should be continued as an official language till at the time when India gets an all India language. And S.V. Krishnamurti Rao said English should remain and a future parliament should decide on the matter. And T.A. Ramalingam Chettiar, he said that it is a very difficult question because it is a matter of life and death for the South. We can understand why. We as a country should understand that on the basis of language, the first state of India was created, the Andhra state. And when Potti Sri Ramlu died, the you can say icons of the past, they rose up to the occasion and redistributed the states according to language. So we can understand. Apart from that, we see that Jawaharlal Nehru was very much aware of the fact that India is a diverse country and linguism is one of the core cultures, core, you can say, emotion. It's a very emotive issue for people, not only in North, but also South and East and West. So he touted Gandhiji's idea of Hindustani, which is a mixture of Khadi Boli and of course Persian, Arabic, Turkic. It developed around 13th century, and that was near Delhi and Meerut. So because it had the amalgamation of Arabic, Turkic, Persian and Khadi Boli, so dialect was very diverse with respect to words. So he touted the idea of Hindustani from Gandhiji's side. First 3 points are very important from the perspective of exam. Remember that no nation can become great on the basis of a foreign language. First that. So English should not be adopted because our nation is so diverse with respect to linguism. Then any country, if it has to become great, should be, you can say, disseminated knowledge in mother tongue only. Now, the chosen language should be more or less a language of the people and not a language of the learned coterie. It was said that, of course, as we still know, there is a mindset that if a person speaks language, English language, the person is thought to be intellectual. But that is not so. A mere language cannot make you an intellectual. What makes you an intellectual person is the amount of knowledge you have and the application of knowledge you do. These both things, and language does not have to do anything. Yes, it can be a better, you can say it can make you more confident with respect to the world order because of thank you to the imperialism, we see that English is the most spoken language in the world. But yes, another thing that we have to understand that a language is for the people in which they can communicate, but not for only those who want to be seen as learned people. And this language should represent India's composite culture. However, he said that forcing Hindi on all of the people of India is not correct. They should adopt to it gradually, but not forced, because many a times it has happened in Constituent Assembly, many people were supporting Hindi, but as the fanaticism arose with respect to imposing Hindi, many people switched sides. So whenever this kind of things happen, reactions do occur. Now, why do we celebrate it? Of course, I have told you that because on 14th September 1949, it was decided that Hindi in the Devanagari script along with English will be adopted as the language of India. So this day was declared so. Many few people know that it is also Rajendra Prasad's first president of India, and he tirelessly put so much effort into making Hindi as one of the official languages. It is not a national language, remember, it's an official language. Thus, remember, the first Hindi Divas was celebrated in the year 1953. Moving ahead to the next part. Now, there are certain constitutional provisions that you must get aware of with respect to language in India. The official language is related to Part 17 of the Constitution. In Article 343, the official language of the Union is declared as Hindi and English, and the Article 350A talks about facilities for instruction in mother tongue as well. So the Constitution knows that there is a diverse culture of language, and knowledge will be best and most efficiently used only when it is transmitted in the language people understand. 350B talks about a special officer for linguistic minorities. So there is a minority on basis of language and religion as well. Article 351 here, there is a constitutional development with respect to promoting Hindi language as a lingua franca. That means promoting Hindi language as a bridge between the people who speak different languages. So it's not like a government is imposing the language, but yes, respect for each and every language should be there. And also promotion according to the constitutional dictates should also be there, which is given in the article 351, which says that it is the duty of the state to promote language, Hindi language, as lingua franca. Now let's talk about World Hindi Day. Now, in order to promote the language at the international level, World Hindi Day is celebrated on January 10. There was a question with respect to prelims, UPSC prelims on that. The first World Hindi Day conference was organized on January 10, 1975 in Nagpur, Maharashtra, and it saw the participation of 122 representatives from 30 countries. So it's not only in India. The day has been observed in India from 2003, and the Ministry of External Affairs began the tradition of celebrating the World Hindi Day in the year in other nations in 2006. So these are preliminary facts for your examination. Other than that, let's talk about International Mother Language Day as well. The world celebrates the International Mother Language Day every year on February 21st. It was approved in 1999 by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. It is observed all across the globe since 2000. Why International Mother Language Day is celebrated? In order to commemorate the initiative of Bangladesh, where thousands of people sacrificed their life to safeguard Bengali or Bangla when they were a part of Pakistan as East Pakistan. So for that only this has been commemorated. Now let's talk about our prelims based question. The first Hindi language newspaper, Udant Martand, was published in India by Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Madan Mohan Malviya, Veer Savarkar, Pandit Jugal Kishore Shukla. If you answer this correctly, I will take your names in the next segment. Now I ask you to answer this question correctly. Do stay engaged so that I can take your names if you have already answered it. The correct answer was 1846. Okay, so just give me a moment. Many of you have answered it correctly, and this question was in the Kohinoor segment. So yes, Treaty of Lahore 1846, Mini Sharma has answered it correctly. Also, Saurav has answered it correctly. Muhammad has answered it correctly. Harshdeep has answered it correctly. Faizu has answered it correctly. Vani Tiwari has answered it correctly. Balu has answered it correctly. Sapna answered it correctly. Then Sagarika has answered it correctly. And Arslan has answered it correctly. Anubhav. Monusha has answered it correctly. Then Tushita, Chandu, also Uni Tejas has answered it correctly. Harsh has answered it correctly. Vasu, Archana, Thakur has answered it correctly. Other than that, Saurav, Shrishti, Rupal and the Success Vision answer this question as well. I will take your names in the next segment. Thank you so much for watching. Stay updated.